Okay, I think we'll start then. Welcome everyone. Thanks for attending this session. This session will be in English as we have a non-Norwegian speaking main guest today. I hope that's okay for everyone. Of course, it's hard to say no at this point, but it is what it is. I will hand over to Pekka in a moment. Just want to introduce myself. So I am the moderator of this session. My name is Jon Jaren. I'm a healthcare strategic technology advisor for Microsoft, which means that you can ask me afterwards any question you want to ask me about what Microsoft does in the healthcare industry. And we are very excited and honored today to have a visitor all the way from Finland. And we want this to be a learning session from a large health institution that in many ways is similar to the largest health regions in Norway, but also in many ways are leading the way in providing modern cloud-based digital patient services, and on the way to that to build a data-driven organization and how to work with all that data. After Pekka's presentation, we will open up for discussion. I have some questions, and I'm sure other people has questions. You can also ask questions in Norwegian. I will translate if necessary. And lastly, at the end of the session, I will give a brief update on the Microsoft Azure Health APIs as they look today. But now, warm welcome to Pekka Kari.
Thank you very much, Jon, and good morning on my behalf. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, EHiN, for inviting and for Microsoft for hosting this session. So I will be sharing some experiences that we as a public healthcare provider in Finland have had on a journey with digital development, with data and with analytics. This presentation by no means covers all activities, so I take one angle, which is mainly related to the secondary use of data and how we can have been building capabilities to put data to work for us. My personal background is I'm an engineer. I started my career in the late 90s working for a medtech industry, and at that time, some of the X-ray machines were about to be digitalized. So I worked for a dental equipment company. At that time, visited quite often also Norway, because Norsk Dental Depot was a big and important partner in this market. And at that time, the very traditional industry was transforming into involving digital X-ray machines, which brought then software to the dental practices. And in fact, I'm still doing the same journey. So for almost 3 decades now, so it's about how digital transforms businesses, how digital transforms healthcare. And it's really an exciting journey. And I think it's one of the key experiences that this will still go on for another 25 years. It's something that is permanently on our agenda. After working in the industry, so I worked in the Finnish government for innovation funding, and then at the National Institute for Health and Welfare, which is the Finnish government agency for health research, and also hosting a lot of the national data resources, which gave a completely other perspective into the healthcare domain. And then now, for the past 3 years, working at the largest healthcare organization in Finland, Helsinki University Hospital. And I have to say that, again, looking at the world from this perspective is different from the previous ones. And I think that this sort of understanding that when we work around healthcare, health, data, technology, so the world looks pretty different depending on where you look at it from. A few words about our hospital. So Helsinki University Hospital is providing the public healthcare services, secondary and tertiary care for the residents of Uusimaa, so around the capital, serving about 1.7 million population, but also some of the most demanding medical procedures and treatments are concentrated into our hospital. So totally we serve a larger population. The strategy and core values of our hospital combine the sort of Nordic virtues of equity and caring into being somehow pioneering in healthcare, so bringing in new solutions, applying them, but always remembering the strong foundations and the core values of our Nordic societies. We are a big and fairly distributed organization, meaning that we have 23 different bigger sites in the region of Uusimaa. However, the academic campus in Helsinki, in Meilahti, is the biggest concentration of our activities, but there are lots of sort of other sites also, and we are serving not only the highest tertiary care patient, but also high volume procedures and patient groups in standard sort of specialized care. I suppose the situation is more or less similar here in Norway, but there are countries where the academic medical centers are really focusing only on the highest level of tertiary care, which then gives a certain flavor into the activities. Just a few numbers. So we have had about 3 million patient visits. The figures are from the last sort of normal year, so that's why I'm putting them here, still, even though they're a bit old, but gives you an idea. So 680,000 different patients were treated, quite a huge amount of different kinds of procedures, examinations, etc., which means that the data accumulates a lot. So that's just the background. A lot of data is generated all the time, and traditionally, what on earth have we been doing with that data? Not enough, not pretty much, not very impressive, I think. But I'll be talking where we are on that journey. Then, of course, being an academic center, so research and education are core parts of this. The Faculty of Medicine is co-located at the campus, and it's only about 5 kilometers from the campus of Aalto University, so the main technical hub and business hub in Finnish academic world, and we're increasingly collaborating with them as well. Maybe in history, the journey from Meilahti to Otaniemi has been a bit long, but even though it's just maybe it's even a walking distance. But nowadays it's getting much more intensive. So a few thoughts about our journey. So as said, this is not a scientific report of what we've been doing. It's not even an eyewitness story, because I have not been involved throughout the journey, but I have been involved the past 3 years and also looking at it from a fairly high perspective, and also from the perspective of collaboration with different types of stakeholders. So in my thinking when looking back, so the 3 main topics that we've been focusing on is, first of all, how to get that huge amount of data that is accumulating and has been accumulating for decades. How do we as an organization get on top of that? So how do we get access and how do we get possibilities to use it? Because that's something that is or was really a big problem. Then the second topic is that we have to find ways how to do collaboration with other types of partners, other types of organizations who have different competencies. An academic medical center, healthcare organization is not the one which hosts all the needed competencies in here. We have to find ways to work with other stakeholders, and increasingly also with companies. And then the third part, how to make them valuable and valid for the clinical staff, and combine it to the rigor and the scientific basis of academic research. These often don't coexist, because academic or research projects, they tend to focus on finding out what's new and not care too much about how do we make this happen in real life, whereas the clinical deployment or taking into clinical practice often then takes things for granted from the large research community and adopts the knowledge from there. So we have to find ways to think about deployment and usefulness of the solution in clinical practice early on, also to keep the clinical people who are extremely stressed and pressure with time, to keep them interested in being in this type of development activities. So start with some foundation about becoming data-driven, so how to get on top of our clinical data. So here is just a schematic diagram about different types of data sources that have been accumulated. The oldest ones are from late 80s. Lab and pathology data has been accumulating ever since. The one EHR system previous to our current one, we've recently transformed to become an Epic hospital. So the previous one was in mid-90s, and it has been used ever since, and the large volumes of patients, all the patient data has accumulated there since. And new data sources have been developed, but these have been trapped into the operative systems. In 2010 or a bit earlier, so it was clear that all the technology forecasting companies showed that there's this thing called cloud computing that is somehow on the agenda. And it was, I think, first time the hospital has been using Gartner as a service. I think in the strategic trends 2008 or something, it was #1, cloud computing will come, and it kept being there every single year. So there was a conclusion that now there's something happening here. So the hospital started then strategy process in 2014 of finding out what is this thing called cloud about, and how should we approach it? What does it mean for us? And this situation still in 2014, with all the data sources and operative systems being in their separate silos, meant that the data was not available. And this strategy work showed that maybe cloud-based systems could bring something into this. After that started a project of building what we call a data lake, started in 2015, and we took it into operative use in 2018 in September, and it's part of our patient information system. Being clear here that our EMR systems and others, they still work on a traditional on-premises type of setup, but this data infrastructure that we built, so we are now relying on cloud-based systems, and the architecture is built on Microsoft Azure platforms, where we have been building several years in collaboration with a local vendor and using the Microsoft Azure services. So the information architecture and the IT capabilities are one, but then in addition to that, there needs to be services, guidance. What does this mean for data use in HUS? So we've been building also internal teams that can work with analytics, that can work with technology. So new roles that are a little bit in between the sort of traditional IT department guys and the clinical teams when it comes to data, so that they can be working closely with clinical teams, but also have a sufficient and good understanding about the IT environment. And then, of course, data and analytics. Increasingly, then it's also about compliance and how do we work with the regulatory framework. So there has to be legal and process services or guidance to anybody who's using these, and there needs to be internal procedures and decisions. How do we work with these types of data once it has been made available. And quite soon it became clear that we need to have a systematic approach into privacy concerns and management of this data. So we started and completed last spring a quality certification, which is based on the 27001 standard on managing privacy and data security. And our IT department now holds this certification, which means that the processes and practices and roles are quite strictly defined, and it's continuously audited and followed up. Meaning that we have our home turf also a bit better organized when it comes to managing the data security, which also is a big concern when it comes to handling large amounts of patient data. Okay, then the second topic about finding ways to work with like-minded partners in co-development. So how do we engage with vendors? How do we engage with innovators? How do we engage with SMEs? Because traditionally, the relation is that of procurer and vendor. So we define tenders, and then we go through the traditional ball game, and then we end up with making contracts with vendors, and then the IT department is more like managing these suppliers and contracts and taking care of that it's going according to what has been agreed. However, this does not fit very well into the domain of when we have to work to do something new, something that doesn't exist, something we can't really spec. What is it that we need here? So with the good support from our national innovation funding agency, Business Finland, so we built this concept of clever health network ecosystem. So ecosystem is yet another buzzword that many of you may have heard too much, but the idea is, I think, in ecosystems is quite clear and quite well justified. It means that a group of partners that share some kind of generic goal together, they come together in an environment where they can discuss and find ways to do concrete things together according to a certain type of contract structure or rule book. And we've been creating this very light accession or participation agreement between the partners, and then certain basic rules that how do we build then concrete projects so that partners can come together and work with topics that have a clear and specific clinical need coming from the clinical departments. It is built on using data resources, and it can be developed into a solution or a product that has potential beyond Helsinki University Hospital. And from the onset of this ecosystem activity, we said that when there is a project, so HUS and the partners, we are together in a co-development setting, and we are not your buying customers in this context. It's something that we're not going to sort of buy this from you, but it's something we want to develop together, and the vendors and the partners' motivation should be in the commercial exploitation outside HUS or outside Finland. So it's not something that you would do as a, according to an order or a procurement bill from our hospital. So there are different kind of companies, Finnish, multinational, SMEs, huge corporations. Business Finland is supporting so that there is a coordination activity, half funded by Business Finland, and then an annual fee from the members chipping into a common pot, which is then used to run this activity and also support then the project preparation, which then leads into concrete doings. And it's an open ecosystem, meaning that new partners are welcome to come in. It's an open ecosystem also in the sense that when there is a project and if it needs a partner that is not a member, so it can be invited to the individual project to participate. And also it is an ecosystem where some companies have already left. They say that we can't find the value for us at this moment, so we're not part of this anymore, and it's completely okay. Currently we're about 15 partners in this setup, and Microsoft being one of those. Of course, the core thing about this ecosystem is finding concrete things to do together. And there are 3 examples. I won't go in very much into detail of these, but there are 3 sort of programs that we're working with currently, and all are based on this ecosystem and then using the data resources that are available through the data lake and data infrastructure. The first one that was launched, which is very close to being commercialized, is an app for gestational diabetes management, where the clinical need is clear. You want to be able to remotely monitor pregnant women who are at risk of developing gestational diabetes and be assured that they and their babies are safe, even though they are not in the clinic or inside the hospital. It results as a Class 2 medical device with apps that are being used and different kinds of supporting services. Whose contribution was around, of course, the clinical setup, the data, and Fujitsu and Elisa, Finnish telco, were the main partners who will then also take care of the commercialization of these products. The second program, AI head analysis, is addressing severe needs in the trauma and neurosurgical departments of analyzing head CT scans for certain types of hemorrhage, which are difficult to detect unless you have a radiologist looking at them. And when you are working in the middle of the night or all times of the day, it might be that this radiologist support is not available. So there are developing tools how to detect certain type of hemorrhage from the CT scans, supporting the decision by the clinical staff when the person is there and they are thinking, can we discharge the person to go home, or should we take him in and do the necessary treatments. Here the main partners are CGI and Plan Meka, and the neurosurgery department has been the main working partner here, hoping to launch a set of 5 different algorithms for head CT scans in the coming year, with CE marked, probably Class 2B software. Then the third program is called eCare for Me, which is the broadest of these ones. And there the idea is to find AI-assisted solutions for disease detection with a case in rare diseases, in automated support for correct treatment where the case is acute leukemia, and then supporting home care in a very challenging condition, which is home hemodialysis. And this is a topic where we've been working for about 2 years now, and the results are a little bit farther in the future, but already we can see that there are lots of good outcomes coming from this collaboration, main partners being Tieto, Evry, and some Finnish SMEs. So this is one important setup for us. So having this ecosystem of partners to work together with. I mentioned about regulatory compliance and the legal stuff, and it's really complex. And as we all know, anybody who is doing this business, we understand that it's quite complex, and it's not only complex when it comes to to discussing where patient data can reside and who is in control of that, what kind of legal restrictions or risks there are. But it's also difficult because there are different types of legislation. If you involve patients in a clinical research with an intervention, it's a bit different, or if you do a pure registry type of research, only assessing patient data from EMRs or the history data, or if you work with biological samples, at least in Finland there is a dedicated biobank law, which again is a different kind of regulation, meaning that navigating this environment is quite challenging. And have to say that many of clinical researchers are really, if I say desperate, I might be exaggerating a little bit, but frustrated that it seems that doing research in this domain has become a legal exercise more than medical exercise. And this is really alarming, I think. And I think that as a hospital, as a important contributor in the advancement of medicine and patient care, we have to take this seriously and find ways to navigate this environment. Frankly, I think that if you want to find a problem in the legal framework of not doing something, talented and very hardworking administrative lawyers will find that, and the result would be that we wouldn't do anything anymore. But I think that the approach has to be that what is the balance of the risk that is involved in the regulatory compliance, and then what are the potential benefits of getting this project done. And when we work with critically ill patients, when we work with in a public healthcare domain, which also thinks about the cost balancing and equity topics, I think these benefits are also fairly easy to find and even quantify. But I think that this is rather immature yet still in Finland also, even though we've been doing a lot of things around that. And then not to talk about sharing data or pooling data together with small patient cohorts across borders. There was this session around, FREMs and US data transfers, but even within EU, it's difficult. And clinical researchers especially, they are a bit reluctant or hesitant at how much will it require work in order to move data across. So then one of the important big sort of data curation or data modeling work we've been doing as part of this project is to find and attach to the common data model community developed by Odyssey, now with the abbreviation OMOP, which would make possible to work with observational studies without moving data around, without the data having to leave the firewalls. So just moving the analytic components and making these large-scale observational studies possible with not avoiding the falling into the pitfalls of the regulatory shallows that are clear. So this is a big work, but I think it serves the purpose. And now again, having a data infrastructure in place, which is modern, makes this possible that we've done the OMOP modeling, which is it's a huge task. It requires data scientists, technical people, and clinical people. But once it is done, you can create a data pipeline so that the OMOP model database is refreshed constantly, if you want it daily or weekly. So we have that in place, which means that it provides an excellent source for data which is curated in a way and can be used for observational studies with partners all around the globe, because data doesn't have to move. So here again, the topic of having a modern data infrastructure has been highly useful. Then third topic is about building these care pathways. We've been working with concept called digital health village for a while, which means that how to build these tools for patients and for clinical professionals that serve a certain patient group, which would be somehow built on a modern platform and modular components so that it can scale, and so that the clinical departments would be able to rethink their process when the patients sometimes have to come to a physical visit. So how do they work in this environment where digital and real world treatment comes together? So there's a lot of work around digital health village already done, and now we've had the privilege of starting a project in the European Framework Program or Horizon to building this sort of engine. How could we build these smart care pathways across clinical disciplines, bringing new AI, ML types of modules into the game? So now it's been very traditional, the digital pathways, meaning that you have a patient-reported diaries or this communication both online and offline, different kinds of questionnaires, different kinds of measurement or prompts recording into the system. But how could we then scale up with AI solutions or machine learning models in this context so that not every single care pathway for a patient group needs to be done in a separate project? And here we have a consortium of 4 clinical sites and some technical partners. The work started last spring, and the case clinical groups are preoperative planning in surgery, very generic. Then it's about Parkinson's disease patients, and then there are some severely ill pediatric patients where their palliative and end-of-life treatment is looked at. So very different kinds of cases. How are we doing time-wise, Jon? Yeah, good. Last topic is about how do we go from development into real-life use, and this is a topic where I think that healthcare as an industry doesn't have a very good track record, or medicine doesn't have a very good track record. Sometimes it is well justified because the evidence needs to build. You need to be able to build the clinical evidence and also then the health economical evidence so that it's affordable and also can be included into the health system. But then there are things that just you haven't been thinking about deployment at all, and you have to go back to square one after you have your good results, especially when developing something that might have a medical device component. When it comes to AI development, so in our hospital we had certain sort of rules of thumb. How should we work with artificial intelligence, knowing it's difficult, it's a bit fluffy, everybody's talking about it. We don't know really if anybody is doing it or was doing it seriously. So the guidance from my boss, so the CDO of the hospital, was that start with low-hanging fruits. You have to show quick wins, how simple they are, because it requires an investment. This is a continuous investment to the hospital IT, so you have to show results that something comes up. So, for example, robotic process automation with very, very tiny AI components, for example, sorting out referrals. It was a good showcase and can be implemented, and the referral sorters, which are supported by this tiny piece of AI detecting certain elements from the free text, is operationalized, and it works well. Then the other one is, of course, how to improve this understanding, build internal competencies, and work with others, because this is something we have to learn together, and then accept that there will be lots of things that just don't work. And the analytics team especially quite soon was able to adopt the thinking that you have to do many things in parallel, and then majority of those you have to adopt very early, abandon very early, and then continue with some. And I think here the discussion with industry partners was very relevant, because this was the insight that was brought, that it might just be that the data doesn't fit into this type of modeling, and you just can't know it from beforehand. And then for us, of course, focusing on critically ill patients was one core selection, partially because imaging data or patient monitoring data, ICUs, and so the data formats are fairly standardized, so you can work with big data type of solutions. But then how do we take this into account that these things can be taken into clinical use? So the hospital internally put together a quality system for medical device development. So we have the ISO 13485 compliant quality system at the IT department, so that these algorithms, if an external vendor does not take the responsibility to bring it to the market, so we can do it ourselves. We don't have commercial interest, but we want to be sure that it can be used in our hospital and in the public healthcare system in Finland. And this is a big change in the mindset of a hospital IT, because we've become a true a disciplined R&D organization in a sense. Then the other part is how to integrate into operative systems. This can be a huge bottleneck. We are now a big Epic user. We don't know yet, don't have the experience yet, what will that mean in the future. The Digital Health Village platform is running in parallel, because the modern EMRs, even though they have good patient portals, they don't fulfill all the requirements that they are. And then there's this integration stuff, which is really messy and difficult. And we are starting to look at what the HL7 Fire could do for us. I was here listening to your sessions yesterday in Norway, and it seems that you are a bit ahead of Finland in nationally thinking that how the Fire is applied in a systematic and harmonious way. We're starting that, hope to be doing some progress there in the near future. So this is one part on the EMRs and operative system. Then there is the more complex part still, which is about when you go to laboratory and genetic data. So there also, I'm not an in-depth expert of this, but there are capabilities in HUS lab, the laboratory part, of bringing in clinical genetic data to quite an extent. But the problem is that this long chain of systems, it's very delicate and sensitive to have working properly. So it becomes really a procurement problem. You can't tender a system like this as one procurement, but you can't really tender it bit by bit, because then the total solution will be perhaps not at all a good one, being so sensitive. So this is also a topic where this type of co-development has existed, and I have to say that then working with the procurers and the procurement rules is really important, because of course you can't do it against the legal framework, but you have to find ways how you work with that in practice. So hopefully this was giving you some insight and ideas what we've been doing. I'll be happy to continue with discussion.
Great. So thanks, Pekka, and thanks for the great demonstration of Finnish sisu, if I may. And I have some questions. Of course, I can start from the perspective of us in Microsoft. So how much would you say that the cloud computing part has played in your journey? So would it be possible to build this without the cloud services?
Okay, contrafactual reasoning is also always very, very difficult, but thinking of the journey and how much it has been really collaborating together with the tech vendors of leading edge. So I think that this would not have happened. But it's of course speculative. The other thing is always you have to think about the required investment, and we've been fortunate to have some investment from also inside the hospital, but also from external funders. But thinking about building these types of capabilities in an like own IT or on-prem environment, it does sound to me a bit sort of UFO to think about, because as said, these technologies have been developed for a decade or so by huge industry players. So how would you build something similar or something comparable with a sort of local or regional project?
I saw also, I think it's very impressive the work you're doing in the certification of the algorithms and the AI parts as medical devices, the ISO 13485 process. And I know also that we've helped you a lot in certifying the Azure components, because you need to certify the whole application stack as part of the solution. And you've certified obviously the Azure Data Lake as a medical device as a part of the solution. But at the same time, there's a consensus and limitations on if it's acceptable to use algorithms that are trained on my patient data to use it in the clinical treatment of you or someone else. So what are your comments to this? I know we talked about it a little yesterday.
I think that the justification, okay, there has to be a legal basis, and in Finland there is some national legislation in place which allows secondary use of patient data that is hosted by the register holders, makes it possible through a process. Then also on the other hand, with the public healthcare system and the clinical relevance, so in fact the patient acceptance is extremely high when you talk about critically ill patients. So it's very willing to work in this domain to help to come with new solutions that would help other patients which end up in a similar situation. I think the more tricky one will be that when we talk about patients that are not yet critically ill but might be developing some conditions, so how do we work there, especially on the intervention? When is it okay for a healthcare system to intervene? One of these projects, as I mentioned, is working around rare diseases, and it seems, or there are research that in a large hospital system like ours, so there are undiagnosed rare disease patients bouncing around in the system, and when they are diagnosed eventually, so many of them have become chronics, so they can't be cured anymore. They might end up with a kidney failure or something like that. So how could we somehow identify a pattern that there is a potential rare disease case? And the big question then is that what is the intervention? How do the contacting of the patient is possible? Because so far still the main idea is that patient comes to the healthcare provider, especially in specialized care. In the Finnish legal framework, there is a clause that says that if there is this significant clinical finding done when working with data, so the patient can be contacted with a certain procedure. The clause is not in effect yet, but it will be in a few short time.
I also know that you talked a little bit about the process automation part, the RPA, and I know you've done a lot of work in model-driven development and low-code, no-code platform. Could you say something a little bit about what role that has played in your strategy?
It has a role. I think that has been more something that is coming in from our partners and vendors, because these come available. It's fairly recent, and I think that there's a lot of work that we still can do and will be doing in taking this into use. I think that one critical topic in a hospital, I think it's everywhere. It's about workforce, staff, and one of the things is that what kind of interfaces and applications you could bring to people to routine tasks that would be more usable than maybe the back-end systems currently offer. And I think that there might be a good potential for these types of low-code, no-code. But we're in the beginning, I would say, on that.
In Norway, there's been lately a certain amount of discussion about giving data back to the patients. Maybe like inspired by the developments in mobile banking. Like if you trust the citizen to make their own choices about their money, maybe you could trust them to make their own choices about their health data, or at least to authorize use themselves through a mobile app or something. Has this been a topic? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It has, and the Finns, already through the Omakanta service, which is sort of the national patient portal for your prescriptions and records, has been in use for a decade. Now with the modern EMR systems, which include a patient portal, so we also get through we call it Maisa. It's a Finnish version of MyChart, which is the Epic model for patient portal. So have it in the pocket, and I think that trusting this to the patients also to do something with that data, it's basically already there, but there are not technical readiness or systems and services. How would that happen in practice? But in principle, a patient can request to have his or her own data, but people don't do that because it's not made easy, it's not made available. It's still waiting, and there are some concerns about that because people are not very thoughtful of how to share their health data. With the data on their money, you might share data on your money, but you wouldn't share your money, of course. So I think there's still a long way to go with that.
Mm-hmm. So we were both at this Schrems 2 discussion above, but so some people argument that the cloud or the way you're doing things by moving things out of your own data centers, that it represents a higher risk to security and privacy. Now that you've run this for several years, how would you respond now when you have some experience in seeing this work? Is patient data secure in-house?
I think that with all storage and processing and use of patient data, there are risks. I think that nobody can claim that on-prem solutions are also without risk, fully without risk. So I think this is the main question: how do you balance the risk in a systematic manner, and then of course require your partners to take action if there are risks that you can't accept. And at the moment, of course, a big topic still I think is also with Microsoft is that what is the EU data boundary really about? And there are contractual arrangements to that, and there are process arrangements to that we are working with. But I think it's this systematic assessment and documentation of risk and actions. Why partially we went in this sort of or standardized, certified quality system on this, because otherwise it might be the management might be not doing its job correctly, even though all the partners would. But I think that this discussion about what is possible and what kinds of risks are involved, if there comes lots of emotions and other things involved, so it might get a little bit fluffy in a way. But I think the most important thing is to accept the fact that there are risks in this work, and you have to work systematically with your vendors, with your partners, to mitigate those risks. And if there are unacceptable risks, then of course you have to think that is there something we need to pull back. So far it has not been, so we've been able to find solutions to the risks that are pointed.
So of all of your steps in working towards becoming a more data-driven health institution, what would you say have made the biggest impact in making data easier to use? Is it your work on harmonization, standardization, or what part is it?
I think that it's a lot about walking the talk, meaning that talk about data has been there for a decade. And working with this, building the infrastructure, making it available, having concrete projects, it's the part where the organization and the partners learn with huge pace. And it's also then bringing, of course, you need to bring some concrete solutions that eventually benefit the patients or the healthcare providers. But I think that these things, the fact that we are doing it and doing it with a fairly big volume is the biggest or the most important thing. I have to say that partially it was due that we started fairly early. The strategy was made like 2015, no Schrems 1, no GDPR, no Schrems 2, no privacy shield discussions. So there was, we knew that there are compliance and legal and regulatory stuff that needs to be taken care of, but we thought, okay, this can be managed over time. I think that now taking the first step is more difficult, but otherwise the learnings don't come if you never take the first step.
So when Schrems 2 came last year, the train was already moving so fast that it couldn't really stop what's happening because of all the investments that have been made at HUS?
It's partially that, but it's also the experience that these kinds of topics come. You know, you have to find ways to work with it. We had our national law for secondary use of health data, which came in 2018. And no, sorry, 2019. So, but anyway, before the Schrems 2 decision, and this was also putting some sort of national regulations and requirements, which were really difficult for us. But you know, you have to work with it. You have to work with your legal teams, with your senior management, with your vendors, with your partners, and find solutions to them. And then, of course, some things we have to reconsider. But like returning into the stage where we were 2015, I find that highly unlikely that it would be possible even.
Do we have some questions from you guys? No, it's fine. Okay, so I have 2 slides at the end.
Okay,
but
thank you on my behalf.
Let's just say thank you to Pekka. Because, let's see here. Oh, litt hardere, var det han sa? Yeah, so actually the health village platform that HUS has developed is also actually been a partnership between HUS and Tieto Evry. So health village is actually also available and made available for other health institutions to use. Last year, Microsoft also announced the Cloud for Healthcare as a package solution that shows an example of how it could look like if you use the different Microsoft components for a certain set of scenarios. So, and some customers just decide that those scenarios are too specific or individual for them, so they just build the same similar thing by themselves. But common to these platforms is typically a set of standard components. I know that HUS they copy a lot of health data to a cloud-based FHIR server, the formerly known as Azure API for FHIR, and these components from Microsoft has now this fall been relaunched as a new solution that we call the Azure Health Care APIs. Now, these Azure Healthcare APIs can be deployed as one resource and managed as one solution, and they include the Azure Fire server, the DICOM service, and the connector for Internet of Medical Things. Since these are, so it brings together the transformation and normalization and ingestion of both structured, unstructured, and also real-time data, also including imaging data. So this is in preview now. It will be in preview in a short period further. And all these services are basically the same that already have been in existence. The Fire server has been there for 2 years. And they are also available in open source version, so you can run them on premises if you want. But they have been updated and improved. There are search performance improvements. There are transaction support improvements on these services that make them an even better fit today than they've been the past years. So if you're interested in looking into the building blocks of building this type of healthcare systems, please look into the Azure Healthcare APIs. So that's just my small contribution at the end. So again, thank you for your attendance, and I also hope also the online viewers have been able to follow so far. Okay, thank you.